Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today, we're going to continue talking about this family that we've been talking about for weeks now. But we're getting there. We're almost done with them. But regardless, there's a lot to learn from them. And today, we're going to be talking about Jacob. And I feel like Jacob's the more relatable one out of everybody so far.
Sure. I think especially with like the sibling rivalry kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, yes.
Yeah, I think he hits home more than like all the other ones because he did a lot of mistakes. But he's still considered a person of faith, and he was even considered a hero of the faith. So let's see what he did and what was done. I mean, there's a lot to speak that revolves around him, so it might end up being a part 2, but we'll see as we go along.
Yes.
All right, guys. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm Merary.
And I'm Elda.
And you're watching Let's Dig In. So Jacob. So there's a lot to speak about when it comes to Jacob. But like we've always been doing it, let's go ahead and start with Hebrews 11 and see what Hebrews has to say about it. So if we go to Hebrews 11:21, it says, "By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff." So something that's interesting here that the Hebrew writer wrote is that out of all the different examples in Jacob's life, he goes to the very end of his life, which is interesting. But nonetheless, like, it doesn't mean he didn't have faith throughout his life. It just is the bigger impact was at the end. Yes. And it'll make sense as we go along and explain everything that he went through to see how his life has changed. Because at this point, he has matured a lot. He went through a lot of different things. So the person that we meet at the beginning is definitely not this person that we meet at the end.
Which I think makes sense why they choose like towards the end, because he went through a lot to be the person that he became. Yeah. So I feel like it makes a lot of sense, because a lot of them are like in the middle, in the beginning, their life started out, or like Isaac from the beginning, he was a promise. But him, it's like at the end. And I think once we go through the story, you'll understand why. Because it took him a lot. He made a lot of mistakes, a lot of steps to become the person that was able to become into the heroes of the faith.
Yeah, and I think this is why it makes him so relatable to a lot of people. And it just makes you like realize, okay, even despite all my mistakes and despite all of our different fails or faults and stuff, we are still able to come back to the Lord and be able to, fix all of those things.
Yes.
So it's something to think about as we go through Jacob, because there's a lot there.
There is.
So where do we start? So we start all the way back to Genesis 25. As you guys recall, we did mention a little bit about Jacob and his brother Esau, and how Jacob deceived his brother and then stole the inheritance, and he also stole the blessing. And she's gonna go ahead and take over after that.
So we're gonna start with Genesis 25, and we start with verse 22. So from the beginning, this is Rebecca when she's pregnant. So the babies jolted each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. So she already has these babies that are smacking each other in her womb, and she's like, "What is happening? Like, my children are attacking each other."
This is before she knew she had twins. They didn't have technology back then. Yes. They didn't know they had twins. But she did notice there was a lot of movement in there.
She noticed something was like aggressively happening within her. So she's like, "What is this?" So she goes to the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." So right from the beginning, we know that one is stronger, they will be separated, and the older will serve the younger. So there's already 3 things we know about these brothers before they're even born. Yes. And that there's 2, of course.
So there's a prophecy right there.
Yes. So when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first one came out, he was red, and his whole body was covered in hair. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping his heel, so he was named Jacob. Something like interesting about this, we were actually talking to our pastor before this, and he had said, "Do you know the significance of this?" And I was like, at first I was like, "What?" I was like, he wanted to come out with his brother, and later on we read he wanted the birthright. He wanted to be born first. He's already from the womb trying to steal that from his brother to be the firstborn, to get that birthright, to get that blessing. So right as soon as they're born, they're already at each other's heels.
Before that, they were in the womb fighting already.
Jolting each other so much that she was like, what is happening?
Yeah, so it just right here, we already get a glimpse of his character, actually, to say it's already we can see that he's like, I'm going to do something about it to get that inheritance or do something about it. So, he's very like, if he knows what he wants, he's going to get it.
Oh, yeah. He's already going after what he wants. Okay, so some time has passed and the boys had grown up. Esau became a skillful hunter and man of the open country, while Jacob was content with staying at home among the tents. And you can see in this next verse, 28, where we have talked about how the parents went wrong here, where Isaac, who had a taste for the wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So you can already see their favoritism, and just how we talked about like the prophecy, you can already see that they're separated because one parent favors the other. And you can later see how, because one parent favors the other, the siblings favor a parent and don't like each other. So once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that stew. I'm famished." Jacob replied, "Sell me your birthright." So right here, right away, he's like, "You want something? Give me your birthright. Give it to me right now." And Esau dramatically was, "Okay, I'm about to die. Like, take it. It's yours." And you can also see how Esau didn't want this at all.
Yeah, it just shows us their characters too, because you could do a whole study on Esau as well. But you can already see that one was like super determined. He valued that inheritance. He wanted it. And the other one who already had it, it belonged to him, he could care less for it. And to the point where he was like, well, I'd rather eat the soup than, have my inheritance kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it just tells you like the value that, and they both learned lessons too. And Esau's lesson was that he didn't value what was already given to him.
Yes.
Which is kind of funny too, because like we go through life like this as well. And it's not until like disappears or it's gone that we're like, oh,
I should have valued that more.
Exactly. And unfortunately, that's a lot of times that's how we are in life. And it's just an eye opener for us to even like, okay, maybe it's not going to be this big, but sometimes it is. It can be our salvation, or we don't realize it, like we're slowly losing it. And the next thing we know, we don't have our salvation anymore. So it's like little things like this that we want to be careful with and make sure we are valuing those things that are precious to us too.
Yes. So we do see that Esau did give Jacob his birthright. He swore an oath to him, selling him his birthright, and Jacob gave him some bread and lentil soup. So he gave everything up for some soup. And then we also go to Genesis 27. So this one is where I feel like Rebekah's deception comes in more onto portraying onto Jacob, and Jacob learning to be like this, because he steals Esau's blessing with the help of his mother Rebekah from Isaac. So Isaac was getting old, he was blind, and he could no longer really see, but he called for Esau because he knew his time was coming. So he called for Esau and he told him, go on a hunt, prepare me a wild game, make my favorite dish, and I want to give you this blessing. Well, Rebekah overheard this, and she knew from the beginning that the older was to serve the younger. And so instead of letting God do it his way, she went and prepared Jacob. She's like, okay, so this is what I heard that your dad's going to do, what he asked of Esau. So this is what we're going to do. You're going to bring me 2 goats. We're going to prepare them, and we're going to get that blessing. So right here, you already see, like, first of all, not only is there, like, conniving to steal this blessing and, like, working on stealing this blessing, but they didn't even do as Isaac asked. Instead of a wild game, he just was like, okay, 2 goats. We'll do 2 goats. And one of
she has really good cooking skills.
I was going to say that. I thought that. I was like, she must have, if he didn't notice, she must be a really good cook.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that Jacob worried about was Esau was really hairy. So we saw that in the verse when they were born, that he was red and covered in a hairy garment. And so what Jacob did to try to convince his father that he was Esau was he covered himself in goat skin.
Okay, yeah. So one thing to think about this, they weren't really identical twins. They were more like fraternal twins.
Yes.
So when we're we're going over this and you're thinking like, why would he need to put like goat skin over him? Because you did mention that Esau was hairy. So when you think of, I guess, a picture to place in your mind, you want to think of like a lumberjack kind of dude.
Yes.
And then when you think of Jacob, because he liked to stay in the house, he was more what you would consider like a pretty boy.
Yeah.
Like, so they were on the opposite ends. So just to keep in mind, like when she goes into all these details on what he had to do to make himself appear as Esau, it's because of that.
Yes. So he did have to go and cover himself in goat skin. And he did it in very specific area. The back of his neck, his arms, like the places he knew his father would touch. And not even just that, but Rebecca went and grabbed Esau's favorite clothing and put it on Jacob. So not only would he feel like him, he would smell like him.
Details right there.
I know. The detail they put into conniving and deceiving him, like, oh my God, they went to the extremes. And the funny thing is that Isaac wasn't convinced at first. He was very cautious. He was like, why do you sound like Jacob, but you feel like Esau? Like, come closer to me. Like, what is, like, tell me, swear to me that you are my firstborn. Like, how do I know it's you? And Jacob does end up convincing him. And he does end up stealing this blessing. And I'm going to read to you guys the blessing because it's a very big blessing that he stole. So Genesis 27, we start at 28. From the dew of heaven and the richness of the earth, may God always give you abundant harvest of grain and bountiful wine. May many nations become your servants, and may they bow down to you. May you be the master of your brothers, and your mother's sons bow down to you. All who curse you will be cursed, and all who bless you will be blessed. So he gave this blessing to the wrong son because it was stolen. And it's a tremendous blessing. Like, if you see this, like, bountiful, may you always have harvest. May you always have an abundance of wine. All those who curse you, will they be cursed. Those who bless you will be blessed. And it even says Esau, when he found this out, he exclaimed, he was hysterical, like, give me something. And his dad's like, I gave everything to your brother. Like, this is my blessing to him. What else do I have to give to you? So it just shows you the determination that Jacob had to steal this blessing that was meant for him. We can read that.
I was going to mention that.
And I think that is like a trippy part, is that it was meant for him, but he didn't wait for God to give it to him.
Yeah, so he was very impatient that he went out of his way to get it. So I think that applies to us as well, where we're sometimes, I mean, God's time is not our time. And we live in a culture where we want things done now.
Today.
Exactly, as opposed to what God, when he's like, a couple years, a couple days.
Centuries.
Yeah, exactly. So God's time is so much different than our time. And yeah, like we just mentioned, this prophecy, this blessing was meant for Jacob. But the thing is that he went the other way and he stole it instead of waiting to receive it.
Yes.
And because of this, we get all these different things in his life as opposed to just waiting for it and then allowing everything just to fall into place.
Yeah, and then something that Merary and I had discussed about this was seeing how Esau gave up his birthright so easily. Like, we believe that he would have given him this blessing too. Like, he didn't actually want this, but it was stolen from him. So to him, it was a betrayal. It was, he took it from me instead of me allowing me to give it to you. And that's what he did with God too, is he took something that was promised to him instead of waiting for that promise to be fulfilled the way God intended it to be.
Yeah, exactly. So we just need to be careful.
Yes.
And if anything, ask the Lord for patience, because sometimes it is that when we try to do things our own way, of course, it brings about consequences. And this is the same thing we see with Abraham and Sarah, where they wanted a child. So what did they do? Instead of waiting for God to grant Sarah to have the child, they went and Sarah made Abraham sleep with her servant. I forgot her name. And well, basically Ishmael was born.
Yes.
So it just tells you, and then of course Ishmael brings about its own consequences because of that. And we're gonna, as we go along, we're gonna be reading the different consequences that came about with Jacob as well, because of the fact that he just rushed different things.
Yeah. And then something, when you were mentioning this one, something I remember our pastor says too is, when you make your own blessing, even if God had promised you that blessing, you're making your own blessing, you're creating an Ishmael.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're creating a curse to your blessing. You're not
problems,
doing you're not doing it the way God intended it. So you're creating problems for yourself because you're trying to bless yourself instead of just waiting for God to bless you, which when He'll bless you, it'll be abundant.
Yeah, so one of the things that we learn right away already, a lesson that we learned from Jacob, is the examples of parents make a great impact on their children.
Yes.
So likewise, just like how Isaac and Rebecca unfortunately made the mistake of favoriting, is that a word? Favoritism towards a child. Having a favorite child, there we go. We see that of course it causes rivalry, and then of course it is passed down as well, because Jacob unfortunately didn't learn from that, and he ended up passing this on to his wives and his children. Yes. And the biggest one being his wives. Yes. So it's something to note here. So he had 2 wives, and we'll probably go into detail a little bit more later, but for the gist of it, so when he stole the blessing and he stole the inheritance, he actually had to flee because Esau was like about to kill him. So
there's even a verse that says Rebecca told him, flee to my brother's house because your brother is planning your murder.
Exactly. So he had to leave. So can you see how things just went downhill after this? So he had to flee. So he went to his uncle's house, which is the mom's brother's house. And there he fell in love with his uncle's daughter, más bien,
yes.
Rachel, who happens to be the second youngest, or the youngest of the sisters. So the oldest one was Leah. The second one is Rachel. So he fell in love with Rachel. So he worked to get Rachel, and then because of trickery and stuff from the father-in-law, he ended up getting Leah instead of Rachel, and he ended up having to work another 7 years to get Rachel, and another couple years to get all this other stuff, but we won't go there just yet.
Yes.
But because once he got Rachel, however, he was so in love with her that he ignored Leah. So because of this, these 2 sisters who should have been loving sisters ended up being rivals to each other and in a constant competition for Jacob's love.
Yes.
And because of this, there's this whole thing that happened, and
we'll go into details later.
Well, basically, so Rachel was barren at one point, and Leah was. It's a lot of crazy stuff, but basically, like, their maidens got involved in all this, but
it was a whole show.
It's kind of crazy if you think about it, but we'll go into it in more details once we get to like a certain section. But we can see this rivalry between them, and then not only that, it's also he did this to his children as well. Yeah. So because he fathered a lot of children, he actually had a favorite, which was Rachel's firstborn, because she was barren at one point. So when she finally was able to have a child, which was Joseph, if you guys are wondering who that Joseph, here we go. Joseph comes into the story here. Yes. When they have Joseph, he was considered the favorite child. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, this causes rivalry with Joseph versus all his other brothers, which were about 10 of them at this point. Yes. So imagine having 10 kids and only one of them being the favorite. So of course, because of this favoritism, they go out and they do that whole deceiving and making it seem like Joseph died, even though they had sold him and he was somewhere out in Egypt.
Yes, I feel like this shows like how we talked. This shows generational curses, like what you do to curse yourself, you're passing on to your children. So in his parents finding that favoritism in his kids, he did that to his kids. So the parents, curse the children to curse the parents to curse the children. And it's just the generational curses that just keep passing on.
Yeah, actually, that's very interesting. Yeah, because of that. And it's kind of like why we need to be careful as well too, because if we actually go back even further, you know how we glancingly mentioned it, that the maidens got involved in this whole situation with Leah and Rachel and Jacob. This is something that was with Abraham and Sarah
Yeah.
and the Egyptian slave. So think about it, like some stuff that happened back here is being passed down.
Yeah.
And it did skip a generation because Isaac didn't do that. But regardless, that curse, I guess, yeah, you can call it a generational curse, is still there. That, and it even got worse because Jacob not only slept with one,
he had
two. And then, of course, with 2 wives on top of that. So he had 4
Baby mamas.
mamas. Yes. I don't know if that sounds so good, but yes.
Yes.
But yes, so it just tells you how important it is for us to be careful. And even if you know something like this runs in your, not maybe like this, but
Yeah.
like anger maybe might run in the family, or alcoholism or something like that runs in the family, we want to make sure we're constantly praying for it, because that is something that can be passed on. And of course, we always have to be careful of what we do around other people, especially children who like just soak up everything that we do.
Yes.
So again, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear it, but actions do speak louder than your words do, than our words do. We can tell you all these different things about the Lord, but if our actions don't speak the Lord, then of course it's nothing. And then likewise, it's the same thing with our children. What we show them, it speaks in volumes compared to what we actually say out loud.
Yes.
So that's why we need to be careful. And this doesn't just apply with our, children. And then again, this is why parenting is super important. But this also is applied to, businesses. So if you're, if you are a team leader, or if you're a leader in any type of position, you have to be careful with how you speak or what you do, because that's what's going to determine if the employees or those who are under you are going to follow you or not.
Yeah. There's also a saying, I know like a lot of them are like, one of them is like measure twice, cut one. There's that saying like think twice and then think again and then say it. Because
That's
you
a good
should
one.
always know that whatever you say, you might think like, oh, like that's not the way I meant to say it. But you said it and it's out there and there's no way for you to take it back. So you always need to be careful with your actions. Once you do it, you can no longer take it back. We see Abraham now has Ishmael and Isaac. And you can even see that in the end, they do become brothers and they bury their father together. But they did have a rivalry to the point where Sarah shooed them away, was like, leave.
Yeah, they had to leave. Mhm.
Yeah, so it's like you need to...
Well, I won't go into it, but there's a whole nation that was built off of them, and that's what's causing this big thing that's going on in Israel. So they're still living through that.
Yeah, so you need to be careful because your actions do have consequences. Whether they're good or bad, they have consequences. And we even see with Jacob that his wives were in rivalry, that even their maidens were sent in. Like, they were at each other like, I can do more, instead of like, we can do it together as a family. So it's always good to remember that your actions have consequences and so do your words.
Yeah, so that's the first one that we learned from Jacob, is the examples of parents make a great impact on their children. Likewise, what we demonstrate to others does make a big impact in their lives.
Yes.
So then the second thing that we learned from Jacob is don't underestimate the law of cause and effect.
Yes.
So whatever you do, it's gonna come back kind of thing.
Yes.
So Galatians 6:7, it tells us, do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. So again, whatever you are planting, whatever seed it is, that is what you're going to get. So if it's something bad, it's going to be bad. If it's something good, it's going to be good. And we definitely see this with Jacob.
Yes.
So we already see that, of course, because he tried to steal it sounds so weird to say he stole the inheritance, even though he was going to get it anyways. But we see that he didn't want to wait. And because of that, he had to flee for his life. And because he used trickery, and we talked about how his character was deceiving people. What happened was that later on, others ended up deceiving him. as
Yeah.
you know, what comes around goes around kind of thing.
Yes.
Kind of thing. And we definitely see this when he was living with Laban, which is his father-in-law. Like, and we just mentioned earlier how he basically treated him like a slave. Like, he's
Oh, yeah.
you want my daughter Rachel? You're gonna have to work 7 years for her.
Yes.
Okay, work 7 years for her. What does he get? He gets Leia. And then he's like, oh, you still want Rachel? You got to work another 7 years
Yes.
to get Rachel. So imagine working 14 years to get the the wife you wanted.
And then on top of that, you have to work another 6 years to work for the flock in order to support the 2 wives that you now have.
Yeah, exactly. So we're talking about 20 years of investment here that he had to put in. So it just tells you, like, you know, you think like, oh, you're like a good trickster and stuff, but nope, there's someone else that's just as bad. So you mentioned earlier about how Isaac was blind. It's in Genesis actually 27:1, where it says, old and his eyes were so dim that he could not see. So this is Isaac, which is why he was Jacob was able to deceive him. But then what does Laban do? He makes the room super dark on the wedding night. That's why he was able to deceive Jacob with Leah instead of Rachel. So, you know, let's not be blind, guys.
Yes.
Yeah, so we got to be careful. And then on top of this, of course, his children also deceived him by telling him that Joseph had died or was killed, as opposed to being sold and being lost somewhere out in Egypt.
Yes. So it just comes around, goes around.
Yeah, exactly. So never commit the mistake of believing that you will be able to cheat the law of cause and effect. And this even applies to us now too, like those who maybe were alcoholics, or maybe those who were, I don't know, in something bad, or like, I don't know, anything you could think bad, and you leave that life, and you turn to the Lord and you're trying to live a good life, but then boom, something hits you, like now you got liver cancer kind of thing. And then yes, you turn to the Lord, but you still got to pay for those consequences.
Yes. And you still have all those relationships that you broke, that you hurt, that you damaged, that even that you're with the Lord, they're still going to take steps. They're still going to come back and haunt you. They're still going to take a lot of processing, a lot of character development for you to make sure that you're able to repair those.
Yeah. And again, the cause and effect. Yeah, so Christians are also subject to the law of cause and effect. Every action you take, be it good or bad, will eventually yield an effect. The effect would greatly depend on the actions you take. And of course, we can see this with Jacob, even if we fast forward in later in his life. And he has repented, he has changed his heart. However, he still had to deal with those consequences that happened along the way. So we need to be careful. So God can forgive the spiritual effects of our bad decisions, but we may never be able to erase its physical effects. I like this one. Yeah. So we gotta be careful, guys. So the next time you wanna do something, don't get me wrong, this is the culture that we live in. It's like, no, you're young, you live your life now, you only have one life to live.
Live for you.
Exactly.
It's okay to make mistakes. All of that.
That's the culture we have now, but we also need to remember we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Yes, of course, if God told us to do something now, we gotta do it, but we need to remember as well that like the pleasures of the world do bring consequences.
Yes.
So we need to be careful.
Yes. Very cautious.
Yeah, so evil and you will reap evil, but if you sow goodness, you will reap goodness. So something to think about. Okay, so I'm looking at the time right now, and unfortunately we're gonna have to pause. So this is gonna be into a part 2 now.
Yes.
So stay tuned, because there's still a lot to read about Jacob and everything that he went through. I still have 3 more lessons that we've learned from him. I'm pretty sure you still have a few things to mention. So there's still a lot to mention on here. So we're gonna go ahead and make it a pause here and just focus on these last 2, or the only 2 we talked about, which was don't underestimate the law of cause and effect. Everything has a consequence, whether it be good or bad. And then of course, making sure that we have that example that is going to be impacting our children and those coming after.
Yes.
So something to keep in mind while we are going through Jacob's life.
Or even those that aren't parents, like it's good to take examples of your parents or other parents and be like, that's something I don't want to do with my kid, or that's something I need to stop here and now.
Yeah, because that's something that we mentioned last time too in the last video, how sometimes we don't even realize we're doing the same thing our parents are doing.
Yeah.
So, something, it's like, maybe I need to look at my life real quick. So let's do an examination, shall we? So definitely I encourage you to look at this again and just see how things sometimes end up repeating themselves.
Yeah.
So, and they kind of do actually, because if you think about it, this goes all the way back to Cain and Abel.
It does.
It's not just, it's not dramatic to the point where, because Abel did die, but it's pretty close if you think about it.
There.
Yeah, so something to think about is just how history repeats itself. So we want to look at our lives as well and see what we don't want to repeat and what we need to do so it doesn't repeat.
Yes.
All right. But I do encourage you to read the story. Again, we are touching on the surface. We still have more things to talk about. So his story starts in Genesis 25. So I encourage you to check it out. That way you have more knowledge for the next video.
Yes.
All right. So let's go ahead and pray to close. Lord God, we just come before you. We give you all the glory, honor, and praise, Lord. We just thank you for everything you're doing in this place and in through each and every one of our lives, Lord. And we just thank you for Jacob. And as we're learning all these different things about him, Lord, help us to see these things in our life as well, that we won't just turn away, Lord, or just notice the good or the bad things that we are doing, Lord, that we will just grab a hold of those the worthy things, Lord, that we don't want to lose. And Lord, help us to let go of those things that we need to let go. Lord, help us to see our flaws and help us to be thankful for everything that you have provided for each and every one of us. We thank you and we just lift your name on high. Amen. All right, guys. So go ahead and share with us something that you liked about Jacob so far, or maybe something we haven't mentioned just yet. And we will continue this conversation in the next video.
Yes.
All right, guys. So thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you guys so much for supporting, and we will see you guys in the next video. Bye.